Welcome to the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs, founders, and leaders at B2B services, tech, and SaaS companies to learn the systems and processes they've used to create success for their business. And we'll also learn from marketing and sales experts to provide insights to help you grow your business. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and the podcast is brought to you by Modern Revenue Strategies and their 10x ROI B2B growth guarantee. Schedule a free diagnostic call to learn the fastest path to double your B2B revenues in just 90 days. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Neil Cohen. Now, Neil is the founder and CEO of Quantum CFO Advisory, where he provides fractional CFO leadership to growth stage B2B and B2C companies preparing for their next inflection point, like scaling, raising capital, or exiting. Over a 42-year career, Neil has served as CFO inside family-owned businesses, public REITs, and private equity portfolio companies, with earlier stops at PwC, Shearson Lehman Brothers. He also developed what he calls the quantum approach, which is a hands-on process for diagnosing and optimizing the key drivers of revenue, profit, cash flow, and enterprise value. What sets Neil apart is his focus on the upstream financial architecture that determines whether a business is fundable, sellable, and scalable. He works through the cash conversion cycle, customer concentration, founder dependence, and sales compensation design, the squishy revenue systems that destroy value during diligence and quietly suppress margin in between. Neil is also an active member of the LA M&A community, leading an ACG, Association for Corporate Growth, pod of investment bankers, deal lawyers, fractional CFOs, and private equity professionals. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to our conversation. And before we jump in on some of these topics that we've got planned, why don't you give our audience a little bit of background? Like, tell us a little bit about some of the twists and turns of your career that brought you to where you are today, and really what you focus on today.
Yeah, so I grew up in the family of an entrepreneur business. My dad owned kind of toy stores throughout New
Okay.
York, Brooklyn, New York, and so from an early stage, I was involved in entrepreneur, helping out in the store as a kid, going to work with him. And as at first it was showing everyone the toys, and then as I grew up, it was start doing being a cashier and closing out the cash register or doing payroll, helping do payroll, which got me interested in accounting and finance. So when I went to college, that's what I studied, accounting. And when I got out, I went to work for PwC, formerly Coopers and Lybrand. Did tax, lucky to start out in tax and audit. I was a small firm in Cooper's firm located in El Paso, Texas. And
Okay.
I got to do both tax, like I said, tax and audit. And it gave me a lot of experience because I was able to go from the audit side and do the tax return and see how they all work together and how sometimes it can be a little different. Um, and then I decided I wanted to go into real estate, and I wound up
Well,
helping start a real estate company, a development company in Dallas, Texas. And we grew and eventually moved to LA, where I went to work for Shearson Lehman Brothers, where I was an investment banker. So I got to learn some more about how you finance deals and take deals to market and be able to become that storyteller. So when you're talking to lenders and you're talking to investors, telling the story about what the project is and what you're putting together. And then worked. I've been after that. I was worked for head of asset management for a public REIT. So I was working in a public company, and throughout the different parts of my career, I've been a CFO for entrepreneurial family-run businesses. And about 3.5 years ago, well, it's almost 4 years ago, I decided to become a fractional CFO. It was part of my career. I wanted to start seeing other businesses and helping other businesses grow. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years.
wow. So from New York to Texas to Los Angeles, you've got the whole country covered. And from tax and audit to real estate to investment banking. You've got all the financial services covered. It seems like you've really uh, s- run the gamut there.
Yeah, and throughout the career, it's been interesting. I've seen different cycles. I've gone
I
through
bet.
the dot-com crash. I've gone through the real estate crash. I've gone through the banking crashes, through a pandemic.
Yeah.
So, I've really learned how to deal with that, especially as a CFO of an entrepreneurial company in a family-run business where, you know, you have to worry about cash flow and how you're going to rate payroll.
Yeah.
And that's really helped in my career. And I've always, whatever company I work for has always been, I'm part of that company. I'm like a owner, and have that philosophy. So when I started, one of my, taglines are, I help business owners solve the financial problems that keep them up at night.
Yeah.
And I do that by helping a company become fundable, saleable, fundable, bankable, and saleable.
Awesome. So you and I have talked about this before, and I think it's a sort of a unique perspective, which oftentimes we see maybe some advisors that don't have quite as much experience as you can get focused on one financial measure, sometimes to the exclusion of others. And I know you do a lot of really thinking through a lot of different perspectives. And one of those perspectives is kind of balancing EBITDA or, ultimately the kind of profitability of the company versus the cash flow, and how those two things work together as companies get ready for selling their business or a capital raise. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of balancing those two and thinking about both of them, and just some different perspectives that you have there.
Right. So, there's two items that people look at. One is EBITDA,
Yeah,
earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And that's what most buyers look at, when they look, what's your EBITDA or what's your adjusted EBITDA? So from the financial standpoint, then there's cash flow. Well, that's how you pay your bills. And
right.
the old expression, cash is king.
Yeah.
Um, I always use these quotes that Charlie Munger, and I'll might not have it exactly how it said it. He used to call EBITDA, he called it BS, because you can't pay your bills with EBITDA.
Yeah,
And
very
then
true.
you had Michael Dell, who had an expression where he used to say he was so much watching the speedometer that they took their eyesight off the gas meter and they ran out of
Mm,
gas, which is the cash.
yeah,
So you have to have a balance between the both of them and how they both work. Because you want to be very profitable. You want your EBITDA to be profitable. And then you want your cash flow because you got to pay your bills and you want to pay yourself. That's one of the most important things. And there's different drivers that drive each one of those. And they kind of cross over a lot. You'll have
uh-huh,
the revenue drivers. Revenue drivers could be based on your leads, your customers, what's your customer concentration. A lot of companies, say, "Oh, I have Costco as my client. I sell to Costco, but guess what? That's 80% of my business." Well,
right.
that's great, you know, but what happens if Costco goes away? Guess what? You don't have that business anymore. The profitability shrinks and you're doing it, the value disappears. So you want to be able to have a really good, you'll have your top you'll have your top 20, 80. They always say that 20% of your revenue comes from 80% of your clients. 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your clients.
Right.
Okay. You want to have that good balance. That's what everyone likes to see. So you have to have that customer diversification along the things. Then it's the price volume drives revenue. What's the right situation of what price should you have and what volume? I was CFO in the hotel industry, and that's a big thing. Is what's your ADR, your average daily rate, versus what's your occupancy, and how do you drive that? And it always got to the point when you're running your occupancies and the market is running at, let's say 80, 85%, you need to raise your rate, okay,
Yeah.
to get it in the balance. And you push that rate, till you get to the point, wait, our occupancy is going the wrong way, or our total is not working. So you have to have that balance and understand how to use that balance. Um, And a lot of things too, people looking at with the revenue is retention rate. It's great. And what's your churn rate? So great. Okay. Yeah. I brought in 100 new clients this year, but wait, I lost 80, you know,
Right.
granted I gained 20, but it's that, they call them the cohorts. What's that um, client base that stays with you? And that brings more value. And plus it gives you a better understanding what your revenue is. And then you have your profit drivers. And that's another key thing is your profit drivers is what expenses you're paying. Like, what's your insurance? When do you, everyone sets up, oh, I've been using my friend as my insurance agent. Well, I went into a company back in 2011 as a CFO, and I started looking at their insurance. I'm going, something's not right here. Put it out to bid, and we found out we lowered our cost a huge amount of money. We saved almost $200,000 a year in just
Wow.
insurance premiums, which is very key. That's just, that's one example, but just looking at looking at your telecom, looking at your phones, everything, and always monitoring what the expenses are. Not that you have to switch it every year, but the point is watching those expenses that'll help drive the profits. And where are you spending the right bucks? There's a lot of things where people say cut expenses. Well, if you cut expenses, what's that going to affect revenue? So you want to cut where it makes it more efficient, and you don't want to take money away from something that could affect revenue in the long run and not be, make it harder for you to do business. Um, I was working with a client the other day, and I was talking to him about their sales commissions and
Uh-huh.
how they're paying it out. But when you dig deeper, the person who is doing the sales also has a very good relationship with all the customers. And what happens if you go back and say, I'm changing your sales commission, and they decide to leave, you could lose your customers
That's right.
um, too. So you have to be very careful of what you're doing. Um, and then there's the cash flow drivers. That's one of the biggest things too, is looking at what's your receivables, watching your receivables, watching what inventory you're buying, watching what payables are out there. So there's a thing called the cash conversion cycle that basically takes into account the average days of your receivables out, average days of inventory in place, and and average days of payables. I'm not going to get into the whole calculation right now, how it
Sure.
works. But when you put those numbers together, it comes up with a number. Well, I had a company, actually, it was a private equity company brought me in. They had bought a bunch of distribution companies throughout the Midwest and Southeast. And they were watching EBITDA. Now, this is where I go where EBITDA and cash flow come into play. They were so focused, private equity is always focused on that EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA and their loan covenants. Well, that's what they were focused on. Nobody was watching this cash conversion cycle. What I noticed was, one, they had their receivables were over 60 to almost 90 days, in some cases over 100 days. Their inventory was building up. We went and looked at it, we found that they had inventory sitting on the shelves that they didn't need or they ordered too quickly. And they had payables, they were paying their payables within 35, 45 days because they had really good pricing with their vendor and suppliers. So they were paying them fast, and it was great. So your profit margins were looking good for your EBITDA, but guess what? You weren't getting cash in the door, and you were drawing down your line of credit to pay your operating expenses. When we started digging in, we knew we had to sell off the inventory, but some of it was slow moving stuff that was tough to sell, and we're going to have to cut our margins. So that wasn't good. And then on the other side of it, on the receivable, we found that some companies that we were giving terms to were out of business or bankrupt, and
Ooh.
we were losing money. So again, that balance of EBITDA and cash flow and watching your numbers is very important. So, and then debt service. What's the appropriate debt service to have? You can keep borrowing money, and it's going to cost you. But when you're borrowing, it's great. I'm going to borrow money because I'm investing in a new factory that's going to grow my business. That's great because you're going to go into a market and you can produce more, let's say, or you have to buy more trucks to run your plumbing company because you have more drivers going out to do more business. Those are great investments. What's the trade-offs and how does it all work? So you have to watch like there's one of the things I do is a 13-week cash flow, and it's pretty standard.
Yeah.
Everyone's doing it these days. Is you put up together a 13-week cash flow, and you have projection out there so you can see where you're going, and you adjust it weekly. You're constantly adjusting it. And then it's also roll forward forecasting. Everyone does a budget for the year. Hopefully, most businesses do it. I've run into a lot of small businesses that don't have a budget, but you start off with your budget and then it turns into your forecast and you keep adjusting it throughout the year as new things happening. So you're seeing where you're going and you're also projecting out for the future dates to say, okay, yes, I can build up my business. What do I need to spend on marketing or sales? I'm going to spend it today. What can it do for me in the future? Buying extra trucks. What does that do for me? How much more business can I take on and how do I grow? Um, Opportunity if I want to buy a business. A lot of businesses are consolidating today. You have a lot of seniors, baby boomers are selling their businesses.
Yeah.
How do I add that into my business? I can go buy that. So again, taking all that EBITDA cash flow together, putting it into these 13-week cash flows, running projections so you know where you're going.
I love that. And I really love that Michael Dell quote. I'm going to have to steal that from you. The paying so much attention to my speedometer that I ran out of gas. And as you're describing, all of these different, sort of perspectives and different ways of looking at it, it really starts to show how sort of one-sided just looking at EBITDA is, and thinking of that as the only sort of evaluation of how successful a business is.
Yeah. And
And
then, and then the thing, what you want to do too is that, you know, if you depending on your company, is sitting down with your department managers and you set budgets and forecasts with them and you set goals for them. So each month you sit down and go over, okay, guys, where are we at with our goals? What are we doing? Have you met what we're saying? Watching it. You might do it each month as a quick thing, but then quarterly you look at it a little bit more and you start looking at what it's driving, where what are each department's little drivers that they're focusing on. And then what a good CFO will do, and a fractional, if you can't afford one or you don't need a full-time one, he's the translator between the groups and saying, okay, sales, this is what operations, marketing, here's what you have to do here. Here, here's shipping or whatever. And everyone getting on the same page and how they all work together and move together.
yeah,
I've been in many companies where operations think look, we're doing everything. And sales is going, hey, we bring the money in.
that's
It's
right.
great. You bring in the money in, but guess what's, you brought in a customer that didn't pay us,
Right.
or you brought a customer in that tore up the hotel, or a business, or, caused damage, or, the operations, hey, guess what? You guys bought too much inventory. You weren't watching your inventory. So it's setting up those procedures in place so everyone can see the dials and what they're looking like, what they look like. So they're making the decisions and they don't go out and say, oh, wow, we can't buy. No, why are you buying that? Why are you buying that? We got 20 of them sitting in the warehouse,
Right.
you know?
So you raised two really good points there. And the first is it's shocking how many times, and so you talked about, companies that don't have budgets, but also what I see that's so surprising is, they'll do a big budgeting exercise at the start of the year, and then either something good happens or something bad happens in first quarter, and then they kind of never look at it again throughout the rest of the year. And I'll be like, well, how are we tracking against our forecasts on, revenues or expenditures on marketing?
Right.
And they're like, oh, you know what? We lost a big customer in January. And so none of those are accurate anymore. We're not really working off those. And I'm like, the whole point of that exercise of budgeting was so that you could then see how good you are at keeping your finger on the pulse every month or every quarter, so that you start to know how good are your systems at tracking and predicting these types of things, because that then
Yeah.
gives you that insight to make those decisions, which is so shocking how often companies don't connect that budgeting exercise with the forecasting exercise and then with the tracking exercise of seeing how well they're
Right.
doing as they go through the year.
Yeah. And it's not always that it's like business is falling off or something bad
That's
happened. It's
right.
something saying, whoa, something good happened here. you
Yeah, so
know?
we don't have to track it closely anymore. We got a
Yeah.
great new client that's going to pay for everything. So let's just
Yeah.
throw those budgets out the window.
The first thing everyone goes, oh, we got to hire more people. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, we're going to hire more people, but what's going to happen? Or we got to do this, or I got to do, and you turn around and go, wait a minute, how does that really fit into it? Let's see, let's test it a little bit more. Let's see what it looks like in a projection and
that's right.
translating that. So, yeah, that's happened a lot too.
Yeah. I also love that translation piece of and you rightly sort of say there are a few folks in the organization that can do this in the way that the CFO can, which is translate that operations is running at a loss every time sales sells this kind of deal, and sales is really excited about selling this kind of deal. And
Right.
so when there's not someone translating that within the organization, those things get missed and they, sort of grow themselves broke sometimes by not paying attention to that across the organization.
Yeah, and you being a kind of in that sales area, you get a lot of salespeople who, if you're watching their numbers, they're just selling one product or they're
That's right.
selling, um, to one group and they just focus on that. And you go, wait, you're not expanding. You got to grow this out. And you get to see that and go, well, you're doing great sales. That's awesome. But you got these opportunities you're missing that can help the company
That's
that
right.
increase our margins because, so yeah, you get a lot of that. And that's one of the things that the CFO role has rolled into. The CFO role has in the past has always been about telling the history, reporting. This is what we've done, blah, blah, blah. One of the things I've done whenever I walked into a board meeting is, okay, here's where we're at. Here's the issues, or here's what's good. And, but here's why it's happening. This is what's working, and this is what's not working. And then here's a solution to it. Um, or here's what we need to do. And
Yeah.
it gave the board decisions to make. Okay. It's interesting. We had an operations guy that used to walk into our board meetings and he just said everything's rosy, everything's going great. And then there was this we had a former CEO of a public company on our advisory board, um, been in the business for years, and he goes, I just don't get this. Every month, every quarter, you walk in here and tell me everything's okay. And when I ask you what issues are there out there, you say there are no issues. And, half the time you're pointing to accounting and he'll tell you, yes, there is an issue and this is what we need to do. And the solution is, but you don't. And he goes, yeah, everything's great. And the CEO turns around and goes, I was CEO of a public company. Okay. I had tons of shareholders. I had, but I always had issues. I always had
That's
a
right.
problem. And I had to tell him, here's the problem. Here's what caused it. Here's what we're doing. And that's more of what I have always made my career about is okay, I'm not just telling you the history. I'm going to tell you what caused, if there's a problem, what caused it, how do we fix it, and where we're going to do it.
Yeah. So your broad perspective, not only through your career, but also in the way that you approach companies, makes it really clear why, companies see you as such a great sort of sell side advisor, as they're getting ready to head into a transaction that, could be really meaningful for the founder if they're looking for an exit, or just, it's the opportunity to really harvest all the value that's been
Yeah.
created in the company. And one of the things that we're hearing and that even you and I've talked about a little bit is, as companies are heading into transactions, whether it's a founder exit or M&A or other sort of investment type activity, that there's more pressure coming from the buy side as private equity has moved into the lower middle market. They're raising the standard. Talk to us a
Hmm.
little bit about some of the misses that you've seen from sell-side advisors that don't have your, expertise in finance as they're kind of getting a business ready for sale. What are some of those gaps that have historically maybe it's been okay to have them because the buyers weren't digging as deeply, but that now are becoming more important for, sell-side advisors to be thinking about?
Well, like one of them I talked about earlier is your customer concentration.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of the things they're looking for. A buyer's going to come in and they go, no matter what. there's something they're interested in your company for some reason, but they don't want to pay that much for it,
Sure.
you know. But you have something that's, valuable to them, but they're not going to tell you that, I really like your sales system better, but guess what? Uh, you know, I like your sales team better than my sales team,
Right.
but your customer concentration, or I like your production line better, or whatever. But they're going to look for something for a reason to pay less money for it,
Yeah.
because they want to get the bang for their buck as they grow it. And especially with PE firms today, who usually have been buying a lot of these companies, their philosophy has changed from being, they used to do it on what they call financial engineering. I'm going to
Okay.
buy your company for X. I'm going to, you know, finance it this way, and I'm going to let it grow because the market's growing. Okay. Well, it's not there anymore. They have to go in and now focus on the operations. So they're going to focus, and that's why they're looking for their CFOs are changing too, because they need a CFO that knows how to go on the shop floor and say, okay, what's going on down here? How are we doing this process? How do we make this more efficient? How are we buying stuff? Can we buy it a little less expensive somewhere or do that stuff? So buyers are now looking at that more so. So from a seller, you need to be looking at it also beforehand to get to maximize your value. So
Yeah.
again, is having clean financials, um, having your whole operation running as efficient as could be. One of the things is understanding what's in your financials that you can back out and have the detail for it. So getting your wife's car out of there, getting your kid's
Yeah.
car off it, getting your kids off the payroll. And there's other things that are non-compensate things like what's your role in the company, the owner? Are you the key person? What happens if you were away for a month? Can the company still run? Because that makes it more profitable and more valuable to somebody on that end of it all. Um, so it's changed a lot than
Yeah.
what it has been. And that's why a lot of it used to be buyers would do Q of E's, quality of earnings. Now you got sellers doing quality of earnings, and it's almost like, okay, negotiation time is my Q of E against your Q of E.
Sure.
Well, if your records are clean and you know it, you're going to be able to support your Q of E better as much as they're going to. You don't want them to find something, you
That's right.
know. And that's what, as an auditor, that's what I want to do. You didn't want me to come in and find something. So when I went out of public accounting into the industry, I always had my records clean. I'd have my work papers or my backup, everything ready for them when they came in, and made their job easier to do
Yeah.
their audit.
Well, and not only that, even just the comparison of, well, are we going to use yours versus ours? If that seller does that Q of E, at least they're aware of where there are, as you say, squishy spots within
Right,
within the reporting. And it's less about, well, do our bank accounts match our receivables? And it's more
right,
about how are our revenues being generated and do we know our story on that, like founder dependency, like customer
right.
concentration. If you get caught flat-footed on that and you didn't anticipate those topics, you're going to have a lot harder time than if you anticipated, well, this is something we need to demonstrate how we have built systems to, sort of insulate us from that risk.
Yeah, yeah. And
Well,
like I said, the market's changed. The market's changing. It's going
yeah.
from financial engineering of buying companies to operational. And it's one of the things I realized when I worked in investment banking, because at the period I was in there, we were basically taking deals and making it look like a bond deal. So
Hmm.
whatever your business was or whatever the product you wrapped it to make it look like it was a bond. And
Hmm.
that's financial engineering. Okay.
Interesting.
And usually, if something goes wrong in the business, it'll affect it, and it's kind of what's going on in the private equity markets right now, in the private capital markets. If there's any little tweaks in the business, or, private equity is holding on to assets longer because they
Hmm.
more financially engineered them a few years ago and they can't get out of them today. Um,
Interesting.
so it's interesting marketplace today.
Well, Neil, you're obviously an expert in a lot of topics, and we could talk all day, but I got to be mindful of your time. But
Yeah.
before I let you go, like, give us the pitch. Like, who exactly do you work with, and how do you help them?
Yeah. So again, I work with small and middle market companies, companies that one can't afford a CFO, but they need that advice. They need that strategic advisor, or companies that don't need that can afford it, but they don't need a full-time CFO. They have a really good controller, gets the books out, and then I can come in there and help them. Companies that are getting ready to sell.
Yeah.
I actually, before I got on the call with you, was with an investment banker that's working with a client that their books are a mess, and they do have a CFO, but they're not able to take them through the M&A transaction.
Mm.
So they were talking about me coming in and helping, working alongside that CFO to get it to the point. But usually it's mostly with companies that don't have it to get them ready for that sale and to work through the sale process. I always look at it that I'm that consulary to like the Godfather,
Uh-huh.
to the
Uh-huh.
owner, that I'm the only one that can say no to them without getting whacked. But they'll listen to you. You can sit and have a conversation about it. And that's the key thing.
That's great. And what's the best way to connect and engage with you for that conversation?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And where else am I? Yeah, pretty much on LinkedIn is where people can get me. So that's one of the ways to get to me.
Fantastic. Well, Neil, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did too.
Well, thanks, Mark. It was great doing this with you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you for joining this episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. We hope you've gained insights to grow your business. If you enjoyed this discussion, please rate, comment, like on your favorite platform, and share to others who will find it useful. Do you know a CEO, founder, or leader at an early stage B2B services, tech, or SaaS company who would like to be a guest and share their story? Send us a note. Let's schedule a conversation.